This is Career Competitor, and it is the podcast that believes we all have a competitive self that drives our optimal performance in our careers and within our lives. My name is Steve Mellor, and in the past 15 years, having been a coach to high performers, Olympians, business owners, executives across all walks of life, I have come to find that competitiveness comes from within. And I'm going to be using this podcast to really showcase how competitors from all walks of life are finding optimal performance and have built the careers that they have today. Hello there, and welcome into this episode of Career Competitor, where today I have the privilege of welcoming in a friend of mine, Dr. Denis Cauvier, and he'll be getting the introduction he deserves here very shortly. But to give you just some insight into what we'll be discussing. Within the conversation, Denis and I dive into why you must respect and acknowledge the value that you've created for yourself. Secondly, we dive into the importance of value alignment within teams. And finally, we cover how resilience is built by a willingness to stretch beyond your comfort zone. So all of this and more within the conversation today. And for anyone who is curious to go and learn more about Denis and the work that he's doing, please head to drdeniscauvier.com. That's drdeniscauvier.com, where you can learn all about Denis's offerings, the 20-something books that Denis has authored, all the variety of things that he has done over almost 4 decades now of business consulting. And I'm just excited to dive into this today. We're going to cover just enough so we hit every single desire that you may have as an avid listener of Career Competitor. So without any further delay, let's welcome in Dr. Denis Cauvier to this episode of Career Competitor, and I hope you all enjoy. Hey, before we carry on with this episode, let me bring your attention to a link that you'll find right there in the show notes so that you can subscribe to my monthly email. It's just going to give you some awesome insights on who it is I am, what it is I've got going on, and maybe there'll be 1 or 2 food for thoughts in there that can stimulate your process, get you to get a little unstuck, get you to take a little bit more action, and maybe get you a little closer to optimal performance as you start to shape a stronger version of your optimal self. Go ahead, click that link in the show notes so you can become part of the ever-growing email list that's receiving this awesome insight each and every month, courtesy of me and courtesy of Career Competitor. Now, back to the episode. Okay, our career competitor today has developed a global reputation for what it means to deliver content and insights that truly impact the leadership and functionality of an organization, whether it be through his role as the adjunct professor, as the president or CEO within one of his 3 businesses, or across the highly impressive career as a writer. It's fair to say our guest understands what it means to incorporate competitive strategic advantages. Furthermore, when you consider statistics such as training 2.3 million professionals worldwide, providing a combined increase of $271 million in client profits, and I believe this stat says everything you need to know, almost 90% of all clients rehire our guest, which means he must be providing a value that's worth keeping around. Referred to in a variety of ways, such as speaker, consultant, author, mentor, professor, coach by so many, I've got the pleasure to be able to introduce our guest simply as a friend. It's my pleasure to welcome to Career Competitor my friend, Dr. Denis Cauvier. Denis, how are we doing?
Doing great, Steve. Wow, what an introduction, man. I don't know if I should be at the edge of my seat or I should take a nap after that. But hey,
you've been busy.
You had me.
You've been busy.
Man. That's awesome. Absolutely, we've been friends for a number of years. And, I'm admiring the trajectory that you're on, and you've been very kind to share some of the exciting things you're doing to connect and impact the lives of your clients and their people. So yeah, delighted to be here and very open just to have a conversation and share some ideas.
Yeah, and in so many ways, it's long overdue. There's always been a reason for you to come on. And, I think way in which you go about the work that you do, one thing I've noticed from the very moment that we've gotten to know each other is that the content and the insights that you're providing business leaders around the world is consistently relevant. It's consistently relevant. So there's literally never a bad time for you to come on a show like this when we talk about what it means to have that competitive edge, whether it be individually or collectively across an organization. So I'm just curious, one thing I always like to just ask guests when they come on is, what's the typical day looking like right now? If you are busy, how are you busy? Why are you busy? Sort of get us up to date with the, we're talking now in August. It's probably going to come out September 2023. What's the world of Denis Cauvier looking like at the moment?
Yeah. It's certainly in the middle of summer, so typically not as many conferences and that kind of stuff, which is great because it's a time for me to do some reflection, do some writing, work on the next book. Also, I'm sort of a closet carpenter, if you want to call it that. I love, getting off the computer and using my hands and trying to create things. So we've got a big property here. Yesterday I was up on a roof, building an extension. But work-wise, of course, things changed with COVID, right? Mm-hmm. Prior to COVID, I was working, repeatedly in 60 different countries in different capacities, from keynote speaker to customized training programs, coaching, consulting, all intermixed. But of course, COVID shut all that down. There's been a lot of work in Canada, where I'm based out of, lots of work in the States. Very slow in the international. A lot of those countries have been reticent to open up their borders. They're opening up the borders now. Things are ramping up. It's the hockey stick. It's taking off. Portugal, Spain, a whack of stuff. Middle East, all coming in this fall. So tons of stuff going on. So a lot of it is just really working with meeting planners, large conferences, trying to understand their themes and how I can work obviously within those themes and try to provide some I'm going to use your word, relevant. Okay, that's a key word. We have to be relevant and just say, okay, well, what can I do with my messaging and the takeaway resources that's really going to provide them not only inspiration. Yes, as a keynote speaker, you don't want them falling asleep, but you do. I believe, and I know you're wired the same way. And we shared some great stories recently. But when you speak, there's tons of energy, but there's so many nuggets. Even if you're talking, for example, for 15 minutes, Stephen, I love that about you. You're delivering real value, takeaway golden nuggets that can impact your audience. And again, that's the stuff that I pride myself on doing. And you got to make them feel good, but at the end of the day, you got to feed them some steak too. It can't be just the dessert.
Yeah, I love that. And I appreciate it too. And I'm going to have to keep you to maybe just 2 or 3 compliments for the host. The host, I'm not here to be complimented. The guest gets the compliments, not the host.
It's all good, but I know there's just a lot of synergy in how we see the world. So that's cool.
100%. And so I love this because it allows me to get right to something I wanted to cover, which is you're an educator at heart. Like you Dr. Denis Cauvier, it's right there in the title. You do some part-time professor work with a couple, two different universities.
3.
Is that right? Yeah.
3.
Yeah. 3. So again, you have this natural urge, let's say, to be there to educate, be there to inspire, be there to encourage. I'm just curious because I've never quite gotten the genesis of this whole journey that you go on. And I would love to start there is, when did you maybe first notice that there is this true natural tendency? It's like, hey, not only do I want to be in the room, but I actually want to be the one who's maybe getting the attention and being the one heard and being the one who's actually influencing these people in the room too.
12 years old is the answer. And to put some context around that, so I'm a martial artist. I've done martial arts for many, many years, started doing judo. And at the age of 12, been in judo for probably about a year and a half of that time. And as you know, with any of the martial arts, you go through the various belts, your ranks. And one of the things that's expected is that as you go through the ranks, you get to certain colored belts, you're now expected to be able to teach others. And in fact, as you get to more senior belts, that is also part of what you're being graded on, is not just your ability to do, but your ability to teach others. And I found myself at the age of 12 working with some adults. Of course, there were little wee kids that started. There were kids my age, there was teenagers, but there were literally several of the judo students were ages of my parents. I didn't have a hang up on that. Some people did. They thought, who am I? And I was reminded by my sensei at a very young age, said, Denis, the parents, these people that you're working with, they know way more about life. They know way more about so many things than you know as a kid. However, look at the color of the belt. Your color is way darker than their belt. So you're there to teach and coach them on judo, not on parenting or something.
Right.
And it was a real eye opener for me that it was a context of knowing that you had value. It was a validation that I had value to offer, but I liked it. I found that I had a natural affinity for training, coaching others, and it wasn't really until working my way through university and college years, working at a Pizza Hut, that I decided to take the reins, and I was assistant manager, and I basically kind of took over the place and treated every shift as an independent profit center with all sorts of inducements of free pizza that they could take back home to their families or whatever, if they met all the benchmarks that I had created. And happily, this is good leadership too, that Tom, the guy that owned that franchise and a bunch of other franchises and Pizza Huts in the area, we were the most profitable because he gave me latitude to play. And then when I went to university, my first couple of years and studying all this theoretical stuff on leadership principles and marketing and sales and customer behavior, I turned that little Pizza Hut into my living laboratory. And it was great. It was great because, I took the initiative to do that. My teammates that were part of my team, I guess, gave me permission to be their leader. And our collective leader, the owner, he just kept on looking at the profitability was just taken off. Customer, complaints had brought him out to nothing. And all his key drivers were very favorable. So it's there when I said, maybe I have a knack for this within the business realm as well. And it was that point, because I was destined to be a banker, and I just graduated, became a banker, and didn't really love that, but I loved this coaching and training stuff. So I decided that 34 years ago, Steve, to hang my shingle in the middle of a recession, brand new mortgage, about to have our first child, wife still, finishing up with school and all that stuff, and all the 101 reasons why don't launch a business. And we figured, let's do it. And that's where a loving spouse and a supportive partner really comes in too. I mean, yeah, I've done some wild and woolly things that have been wonderful. But Debbie, my wife, has been so supportive of the process. She allows me without friction to go and try things, which is unbelievable.
Yeah. It's like a true freedom in any partnership like that when it comes to the person that you're sharing a house with and raising a family with and all that kind of thing, whether it be the man or the woman, that ability to just give the other that freedom to be them to their fullest and understand why they're doing it. And clearly at the heart of your why, there was some, even at that young age, there's some really cool insights there that undoubtedly stuck with you and able to build entire philosophies and teachings and trainings off of. The first thing that you said there is to focus on simply looking at the color of the belt, to know that, hey, I have the value that I've actually created and earned for myself. It's not about comparing, hey, how long have I been doing this, or other ways in which you could potentially compare one person to the next. In that situation, you had a sensei that was able to say, hey, listen, stop looking outwards and look right down at your waist and see the color of the belt and what you've truly earned and the value that you've created for yourself. Talking about relevance as well, how important is that very message here 35, 40 years later, the importance of that very same message that that sensei was given to you back then?
Critical. Some of the words that come to mind is, taught was certainly a sense of confidence, a certain of competency and ability. But at the same token, it was a balanced message that never to become arrogant or apathetic, or have condescension towards your students. One of the things that all the black belts, when you go for your black belt exam, so it's a very grueling mentally and physically exam. And I didn't know the tradition at it because it was because I was new when I went to another dojo trained by the same master sensei. And so when I went there, I did. They walk the line. It's called. They go, what's walk the line? But basically, you've all but passed. And then what you do for the most junior belts, the white belts, right up to the old guy himself. They all get to throw their favorite punch, kick, or throw, and you just have to block it, or if you're thrown, you have to do your break fall, land properly, get back up. Now you're exhausted. So the white belts, the yellow belts are pretty easy. Well, some of those mid belts, your orange and your yellow, blues, etc., greens, they're coming in at you saying, "Okay, yeah, Mister Brand New black belt." And they're giving you a good shot, and you're supposed to deflect it but not hurt them. So you got to be very mindful. It takes a lot of energy. I finally go through the entire line, and I get through all the black belts. And I am sore at this time because the black belts don't hold back a whole lot, right? So I figure, okay, finally I survived. But then all of a sudden I get to the old man, the master, right? And he's an old fellow. And he says, "Oh, okay." He says, I'm not throwing a punch or anything. We're doing 2 minutes of open randori. 2 minutes open randori means basically you're in the ring with this guy for 2 minutes. Well, I'm exhausted. So I thought, okay, the only way I'm going to survive this is right after the bow. This is in my mind. I'm going to bow and rush this guy. I'm just going to throw my best at him and hope for the best. So I remember running, and the next thing I remember looking up, and I'm all woozy. Basically, I ran for him. He chucked me on the ground, threw me down, and knocked me out cold. Then he picked me up. This is the life lesson to all this, and I think it's very relevant for today. Put his arm around me, and he says, "You've absolutely earned the black belt." But he says, "Remember," he says, "there are 10 degrees of black belt." He says, "As a black belt, Dennis, you've now only really become a serious student of our craft." And I think when you're talking about building resilience, one of the brand new books I've got is on building resilience, right? And resilience is such a hot topic right now. And I mean, I think it's one of those evergreen topics. It's always been an important topic. But how do you build resilience within your team? A lot of it has to do with, obviously, the people you surround yourself. It's the leadership. It's the culture you create. But it's also that ideology of having confidence to be bold and go try stuff and try to punch above your weight class, but never become arrogant or apathetic or think you know it all. Remember that we're all a bunch of serious students. When you have that, because again, apathy is when you just don't care, and arrogance is when you think you know it all. Well, these are the kiss of death to any individual, any team, any organization. The moment you believe, your bio tagline, you're in trouble.
Right.
When that gets going to your head, the end is near.
It goes back to so much of what this show's about, the work that I do, you do, and what truly epitomizes why people even have and establish a growth mindset is, where is your curiosity? Like where are you on that curiosity spectrum?
Right.
Because if you are at either ends, as you just acknowledged there, when you're at apathy, when you're in arrogance, you're really not curious at that point. You've decided that there's no information for you to obtain. And with that being said, you've already taken us there to this new book on resilience. And I definitely want to go into that here in a moment. Sure. But one other thing that you mentioned there back with the martial arts story was that when you get to certain levels, you're expected to teach. And you look at corporate America, you look at the global industry that is any business. A lot of the time, people earn their way to certain levels, but they don't necessarily, as they go, appreciate the importance of giving back, looking back where they've come from and looking at it in a sense of, hey, listen, I've gone this far. What do I now want to do to pave the way for the next? And so I'm curious, with the work that you're doing today, how often is that sort of sentiment coming up with the people that you're working with?
Yeah, I think you see that sentiment coming from a couple of places. One place is some people that just, it's out of their comfort zone. They just don't know, they don't know how to do it, or they don't think they're able to do it. And some people just don't want to do it. Now, it's the last group that really concerns me, because you think about that. Is if someone doesn't feel that they have the confidence to step into that coaching leading role, or they don't have the ability, that's one thing. We can help them with that. But if somebody chooses not to, that, in my estimation, is a very shallow, self-centered, and I'm going to stop my comments there because I can go off the tracks pretty quick. That it speaks volumes to the limitations of that person's character. That's a polite way to say it.
Sure. Like that. I like that.
Yeah. So again, on that, when we're developing our people, we got to go back to day one. And what do I mean by that? Well, unless you inherited this team, at some point somebody hired this person. This is where I think a whole lot more attention needs to happen on not just hiring for the position, but hiring for the future. They say hire for attitude and train for competence, not the other way around. Now, again, if I'm going for cranial surgery, neurosurgeon, I'd like someone that was in at least a couple of days in medical school, as opposed to just, I can do attitude, right? I mean, this can be overdone. But I mean, if you're talking about building resilience and really moving your organization successfully, I want to look at some of those softer issues. I want to look to what extent is someone truly a team player? Does someone naturally have a sense of true gratitude and enthusiasm? And to what extent are they going to be a catalyst within the organization, even at the most junior positions, just through how they act? Are they going to be the spreader of, we're all going to spread viruses. Is it going to be the virus of mediocrity, of scarcity, of we can't do it, that's not my job ideology, which is toxic? Or is it going to be a can do, let's give it a shot? Hey, even some upward praise. Hey, boss, that was amazing. Could you teach me that? Without sucking up at a sincere, again, this is the stuff that I want to see even if it's not totally defined with the person, they may be awkward with it, but I want to see evidence of the true character, and that character being in line with the core values. Value alignment is absolutely essential. And if you claim as an organization that you have an agile, culture, a culture of innovation and resilience, is that who you're looking for? Are you pre-testing that? I have programs on how to pre-test for that, how to actually interview for that, what kind of questions, what to look for, how to set the interview up, deliberately stress-producing and resilience-evoking questions during the interview. There's so much that can be done, even though someone say, well, that's overdoing it. We're just hiring, an entry-level position. Well, let's go back to what is your brand promise? If you deem to be, I'm going to throw some HR buzzwords, an employer of choice, you can have a career from us. We promote from within. Well, if you're doing any of that stuff, then that means you should be taking junior people, and eventually they should be so engaged that they want to stick with you for a good chunk of their career, if not all their career, and they should take on more areas of responsibility and eventually be getting into leadership roles. Well, if you haven't looked to see if the preconditions of that leadership is present, you may be faced with a real issue.
It's this sheer notion of value alignment. Immediately, what I love about the term is that, yes, of course, at an organization, this should be essential. All parts of the process of going from recruitment to hiring to onboarding to everything and anything that comes after that. But at the same time, what it does is, if you're preaching that sort of a thing, individuals then have the opportunity to look in the mirror and say, what are my values? How am I aligning myself? It almost puts a little bit of ownership and accountability on the individual as well. As I'm hearing you sort of talk through this, I speak about buy-in now, and this concept, like, people always talk about how do we assess buy-in daily. It's like, well, you actually sold buy-in when you recruited the individual. So it's about honoring and respecting the buy-in. It's not about seeing it increase and improve. The engagement is what they're actually talking about. You're talking about disengaged employees that need to become engaged. So here you are saying, like, through this process of getting an individual to come and work for you, there's an opportunity for you as an organization to look in the mirror and say, who are we? What do we stand for? And how do we continue to invest in the strengthening and the growth of that? And then how do we recruit that into the organization to make sure we don't have those inevitable gaps and disconnect that will come down the road otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. And here's where there's some pushback in the world, and I want to address that. So a lot of people will say, in theory, sounds great. However, Dennis, have you read any newspapers lately or listened to any podcasts? There's a war for talent out there. There's a very tight labor market. I don't live in a cave. I know what's going on. But here is the solution to this. And it sounds a little contrarian or counterintuitive. One of the things to do is, if you're looking to fill some more vacancies, do not lower your expectations or your standards. Do the opposite. Raise them up. Now, people go, Dennis, that's nuts. We can't, even when we're lowering our standards, our new standards is if they can fog up a mirror, they're in. You do that, you will live to regret that. Several reasons why. Number one, if you are really that desperate and you're going to pick anybody, the bottom of the proverbial barrel, if you will, you are going to be very frustrated with that individual. There are going to be attitudinal issues. And, let me just share one thought on this. When you're dealing with a performance issue or something that's not meeting expectations, it boils down to one of only two things, guys. It is either a training issue or it's an attitudinal problem. When you pare it down, and I've got this assessment of 10 logical questions like a decision tree, right? It says, okay, it will expose. If you having a focused conversation with any employee and they're falling short of expectations, either it's a training issue, then great. If it's a training issue, you've identified, then train them. Problem goes away. Or it's an attitudinal problem or challenge or blockage or whatever you want to call it. Here is the reality, guys, that no amount of money and training and development will ever solve the issue until you resolve with them. Ultimately, they have to resolve that attitudinal blockage. And if you cannot get beyond that, then you got to just cut your losses and part ways. One of the fallacies is where organizations keep dumping smart money into training when it's an attitudinal issue. Now, it's a training issue, easy to solve. So all this to say, okay, so you've got the challenges if you've hired the wrong person. Now, not only will that person not work out, but they're probably going to do a whole bunch of expensive things that are, the learning curve is going to be much longer. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to take off customers. They're going to have a negative impact on their coworkers. That not only are you probably going to have to replace them and go through the whole cycle again, which is a pain, but also they're going to negatively impact their coworkers. Study after study after study says this very clearly, that the number one reason why people do not leave an average paying job, it's the nature of the people they're stuck to work with, not the nature of the job itself. It's a fact. So by lowering your standards, you're also sending a very pervasive message to all your local teammates who have been working, who have been engaged, have been putting in their effort, that basically that you do not value them.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you finish your thought.
No, I was just going to say, you're actually compounding the issue now. So what you're doing is not only do you have that original hire that's not working out, but you're bringing a toxin into the workplace. And in fact, Yale University recently released a fascinating stat, that out of a team of 5 people, if there's only one toxic person out of a team of 5, that your top performer, this is the one you want to hang on to, your top performer, if they have to spend more than an hour on average day with that toxic person on a team of only 5 people, has a 59% probability of leaving the job. Why? They're a top performer. They can go get a job anywhere. Think of the damage to your organization. So what you got to do, in my estimation, is you got to rise your expectations.
Yeah,
absolutely. And by communicating that, you're going to actually, here's the point. There's not a ton of people that are unemployed right now. In fact, the people that are chronically unemployed, you want to hire anyway. But there's a whole bunch of passive job seekers, people that are gainfully employed, good workers, that they're just looking for a better opportunity. And I don't mean necessarily more money. I'm talking about a more proactive employer that will make the wise investment into their people. This is, if you super serve your people, it's like customer service. What's your best form of advertising? Word of mouth. What's your best form of advertising as an employer choice? It's employee referrals. It's word of mouth. Guys, we don't own our brand. We know we throw our brand up on our website and go, our mission, our brand. BS. Our brand is not what we say it is. It's what our clients and what our employees say it is. And that is an earned thing.
Love that last bit. It is an earned thing, because it goes from both ways too. If an employee sees the employer prioritizing that very insight, saying, hey, we want to know what you're experiencing within this culture. It's amazing how suddenly now the employee wants to give more to that employer. They want to show up more consistently. Yes. They want to they're being heard, they're being seen. And then we can start to actually focus on that individual investment and individual development. And I think so much of what you're saying here is just resonating with me greatly in the sense of the conversations that I have out there today. When I hear about frustrations with said person and frustrations with this person, it's just a lot of the time it's a complete misunderstanding of they don't know what's expected of them. This individual has expectations that aren't even really being shared or understood. And there's a lot of just mixed communication going on in a shared space. And then you end up with someone that can potentially become toxic because their attitude starts to become kind of crappy because they're not really feeling as though they're in the right place. And to your point, then suddenly now it's like the damage can really start to then accelerate based on who it is that's being surrounded by that toxic individual. And we could stay on this for hours. There's a lot of stuff here, but with us being in this space of just sort of individual development now, I now want to bring it back to this new book of yours around business resiliency and just the resilient mindset, the resilient individual. You know, my background in sport, I could pick them out in a lineup. You know, anyone that showed resilience daily, I was like, let me coach them and let me coach them all day, because I know that no matter what I throw at this individual, even if it's too much at times, they're going to find a way to even communicate that very sentiment. And I'm going to respect it more because I know how they handle the adversities that I consistently throw at them.
Right.
I'm just curious, just based on the genesis of the book, the premise of the book, etc. Talk to us firstly about the book. I'd love to just hear about the book to begin with, but then let's maybe dive in a little bit to this whole concept around resiliency as well.
Absolutely. So the book, a good friend of mine, Dr. Natalie Beauchamp. So Natalie is a chiropractor. She practices up in Ottawa, Canada. She's also a speaker. She's done some executive coaching and that kind of stuff. And just a dynamo, just a very, very bright lady. So we were talking about some ideas, and the notion of hormesis came up. Now, I'm going to describe what that means because some of your listeners may not know what hormesis means. But the title of the book basically is about building unshakable business resilience. And the subtitle is really, in a sense, of how to leverage hormesis essentially for the wealth of your business and the health of your people. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but let's unpack it. So on that book, we basically co-authored two books. So I was the lead author on the business book, and then the second book is really a toolkit. It's a health toolkit for the individual themselves, which obviously, as a medical doctor, she was the lead author on that. And I can share thoughts from both of those books. But what we did is we said, okay, hormesis. Hormesis is a scientific or medical notion or philosophy that basically says this, that by deliberately adding in some sort of stressors or toxin into the body, if it doesn't kill you, it does what? It makes us stronger. So the idea is we can build resilience within our bodies by deliberately having these hormetic challenges. I'm going to give you your classic ones, and people will know this stuff. For example, doing a lot of exercise, that will make you stronger. However, you can overdo that. So, you got to find that balance. Strength, stress, dealing with stressful thoughts and complex, problem solving. Also nutrition and also fasting. So these are, cold plunging as well as heat like a sauna. Again, you stick yourself in enough cold water long enough, you're going to die. But in short doses, there's also evidence that proves that it builds body resilience. Okay. So we start talking about this, and we said, okay, organizations are desperately seeking ways to become more resilient, particularly given the pandemic and everything else. And it's not just the pandemic. Think of how technology is leapfrogging faster and faster. There's so many disruptors. I mean, think about it. Maybe 12 years ago, you and I were talking around. I said, "Hello, Steve, I got an idea. Man, this is going to be awesome." So listen, what we can do, you see, this is going to be so good. We're going to make a lot of money, Steve. What we're going to do is we can have a whole bunch of taxi cabs, and we're going to create the world's largest taxi cab company, but we won't even own cars. People listen to us would think we're smoking the good stuff. Well, what am I talking about? I'm talking about Uber or Lyft or any of these, right? Well, that's just an example. Airbnb. These are all massive disruptors that change the world. So with all of these things happening, plus the pandemic and organizations are understanding they have got to develop resilience. Now, resilience means a whole lot of things. For example, resilience within the organizational setting could be certainly being very clever with your money, not overly extending yourself, having access to capital, all this kind of stuff. So there's financial, there's risk tolerances, having a smart, balanced portfolio of clients so that you're not relying just on one mega client that if all of a sudden they go out of business, you're now dead. There's compliance issues, there's software, there's cybersecurity, there's a host of things. That's not what the book's about. My common area, let's go back to my martial arts days, early days. What I absolutely loved and what gets me up in the morning, you said, what's your day look like? Any day, and this is most days, any day I'm up there and I'm making a human connection and I am offering up human generated and human driven solutions that are going to move organizations forward. That's what gets me fired up. In fact, what I like to say is I provide what I would call the high impact, low cost, people driven solutions. Whether the challenge is we're losing our sales or we want to take advantage of a new market penetration thing, or we've got high employee turnover, or we don't know how to attract, retain, or develop, whatever it is. To me, the answer is, and I'm not knocking software, I'm not knocking investing in that new conveyor belt or whatever, capital equipment. But at the end of the day, if you do not have your people firing on all cylinders, none of those investments will you be able to capitalize on and get your return on investment. So I'm always looking, and I pride myself in finding very incredibly cost-effective ways to leverage people efficiently, not just to get the ROI out of them, but to also have them become truly enabled, engaged members, long-term members of the organization that pour back into, go be above and beyond what the expectation is, and really become part of the solution moving forward. So the book takes that mindset. It's what are the things you can do within your organization to how do you attract these people? First of all, how do you pre-screen them? How do you you used the word earlier, onboarding. What can you do to get these people to accelerate the learning curve, reduce turnover, reduce absenteeism, reduce conflict, increase profitability, enhance safety, all of these benchmark things that we can measure, and do it in a way that's going to drive resilience. How do we actually make an agile workforce that leans into, don't just capitulate and puts up with elements of agility, but leans into it and says, man, this is where I want to be. This is where I plant my flag right with this organization. Why? Ultimately, I call this cause alignment. Earlier, I talked about values alignment. Cause alignment is when you take it to the next level. Now you're living on purpose. So as an individual, if you see where that organization, where they're going, what they truly stand for, and what are the things they do, not just on the money, on the bottom line perspective, but above and beyond as players and contributors in the community, as innovators in the space. And ultimately, that becomes more mission and cause oriented. When you look to your own core purpose and what you stand for as a human being, realizing that, well, you have to put in 40, 50 hours a week, whatever it is. Most people are not independently wealthy, so they got to work. But it becomes more of a point of passion and connectivity, that cause alignment. Man, life is great when that happens. And so I help organizations create those scenarios. And then, of course, anybody who feels that way about their employer becomes absolutely unstoppable in what they can accomplish. It's going back to, you talk about your book for a second, breaking through that glass, right? Unbelievable. It's when you can turn on those lights within someone, and obviously you got to resource them properly, give them the right tools and everything else. But as a minimum, we should be doing that for our employees anyway. But when we can create that spark within that individual, and then within that team, unbelievable things can happen, and do happen.
Exactly. And I think that's what I love about so much of this content, of our conversations over the past few years. Like, there's a simplicity element to it, and in no way is that disrespecting the work that either you or I are doing, but there's a simplicity element to it in that everything that you're describing here to me, it's like if you told a business owner, hey, as you're starting this business, you founded this business, as you go on this journey, there's going to be times where you have to take a few risks, where you have to get out of your comfort zone. Does that sound like something that's realistic? And they're going to say, yeah, of course, absolutely. I'm not just going to trip and fall over into a successful business, so why is it we're not expecting the same from the individuals that we then hire? It's just like, listen, you don't want these people to come in and remain in their comfort zone. You want them to have this element of, hey, not only do I see a difficult situation or an adversity or a lot of hard work in front of me, but I'm actually gravitating towards it, and here's why. And the company themselves have done their due diligence in educating that individual to say, this is why. This is why we run towards the adversity. We run towards the hardships and the work that goes into just significant uptake and growth. The more you start to focus on that through, as you said, the onboarding and through all the other parts that come with that, all of those moments are going to become so much cleaner, so much more efficient. There's going to be so many less sort of surprises as you're going through that as well. And as you said too, there's this pride element that comes with it as well. People are excited to be a part of it because they know what's on the other side. They're going to feel better about it. They're going to be excited about it, and they're going to show up and they're going to represent the brand that is the organization that they're actually working for. Again, it's simple to say. But I know for whatever reason around the globe, over thousands upon millions of businesses, for whatever reason, it's not easy to do.
No, it's not. But again, it all starts with leadership and establishing that culture. So when we're talking about the hormetic challenges, right? Hormesis, leveraging hormesis. I'm not talking about, okay, let's go to the lunchroom and we're going to poison their soup and it's going to make them stronger, or we're going to so stress them out. I'm not talking about that, but in the book, we don't actually refer to it as like a bunch of stressors per se. We call the term stretching. So it's about stretching beyond comfort zone. One of the absolute most challenging limitators within the workplace is comfort zones. And that can be described as, well, we've always done it this way, or it's not my job, or however you want to mention it. But it's, by extension, it's all meaning the same thing. Is that we have created a neurological habit that becomes a bit of the old school broken record. You're stuck in that groove. Now, the moment that happens is not only will people not see a tsunami that's a real risk heading towards them because they're so complacent into that groove, that they won't even see it, let alone come up with some creative ideas on how to deal with it proactively before it blindsides the operation. So it's this kind of thinking. And again, I don't want to make this sound like this podcast is all about recruiting people or the selection process, but you have to start with very strong people. Now, you have who you have within your existing team. I'm not suggesting you get rid of them all and rehire. No. There's existing leadership things that you need to do to develop your people. But every time you have a new person, you definitely want to raise the bar. So, for example, you want to look at to what extent are people willing to come out of their comfort zone. So you can ask them. I mean, the typical questions that some employers might ask is, are you open-minded for new things? Yeah, sure I am. How do you handle stress? Super duper. Great. Next question. That sucks. That's horrible. Yeah. You got to dig, right? So a different approach would be, for example, something like this. So Steve, you're applying for a job. The team, just to share a little bit with you, Steve, is that it's a pretty dynamic team. There's a lot of, sometimes you'll be working on a project and then all of a sudden one of the engineers or somebody's going to realize that, no, that's not going to work. So you got to literally pivot all that work seems like you're throwing it in the garbage. So Steve, how do you deal with that? And then so Steve answers, and I say, well, that's awesome. Steve, give me an example of a specific thing that happened to you that relates to this. What did you do about it? Well, and then I ask you, well, what frustrated you about it? And I dig and I dig and I dig. So in other words, I look at the nature of the entire team, the whole organization, and also the nature of the job. And I say, okay, from a resilience perspective, what are the human characteristics that I am seeking? And then I am looking at real, I'm looking for evidence that this exists. So I can see it in the covering letter. I can see it in the resume. I can see it, and I'm actively seeking it during the interview. I also am a huge advocate of going out and doing reference checks. I will pose very specific questions about certain, problem solving or whatever, innovative thinking or dealing with failure or whatever you want to call it, or disappointment if you don't like the word failure. I will do a 360 perspective deep dive to see what the character is of the person.
It's so important.
Absolutely critical.
And just what I've loved about all of this that you've kind of taken us on here through this episode is that you could easily be listening to this and hear it through this lens of just organization, company, teams, groups, etc. But every single one of these insights that you provided in that area is equally, if not even more important for the individual as well. Absolutely. And that, when you talk about resilience, it's all about individual resilience. I love this notion of stretching beyond the comfort zone. Again, what it does is it certain word. I've always been an advocate for words, and that word immediately comes to mind. I just think of myself right before I'm about to go for a run, and the 38-year-old Steve is not the 18-year-old Steve, and that stretch is not a nice stretch. It doesn't feel good. But then the run itself is more difficult than the stretch that I started the run with. And then the run actually then takes me back to that stretch when I'm done to stretch again. And lo and behold, stretch is a little easier because I've just come from a much more intense run. My body's a bit more warmed up. I've been challenged a little bit more. So even just the physical idea of stretching and the way it works with our bodies, our minds, they're there to do the same. Our minds are there to be stretched. If it's uncomfortable at first, put yourself in some sort of simulation, in some sort of repetition of what it is you're asking the mind to do, and then go back, and lo and behold, the next time you do it, it's not going to seem like as great of a stretch. In fact, you're going to realize that there's comfort zones so much further beyond you.
Absolutely. And if you have, for example, someone who is like-minded that wants to be part of the solution with the team, what I have found, my research, and I've done so much research with this over the last 4 decades now, on this notion of blockages to coming out of your comfort zone or stretching, and it's really basically 2 words: fear and judgment. People fear failing. And they really are apprehensive that they're going to be poorly judged for their efforts. So one of the things is when we're looking for people, we want to find people that are strong enough that don't crumble, that are self-starters, and aren't as let's say soft. But secondly, we also want to create an environment that allows people. In fact, I use the word failure because people know what I'm talking about, but I don't even like the word failure. What I'll call it is a missed perspective, a disappointment, or alternative results. Why? I'm not trying to come across being so politically correct that everybody who participates gets a ribbon. I'm not saying that. Because I do believe in life, there are people who will come first place, and by definition, someone's going to come last place, and we got to call it what it is. Okay. However, that being said, within the environment context, I am convinced that leadership has to create an environment where people will not be reticent to try to put their best foot forward and fail. And and failure. And here's the rub on this: it's only a failure if we didn't learn from it.
Exactly.
I mean, think of it. An effective salesperson, they're going to try all these different closing techniques, and they're going to keep going back, and they try this and they try that, unless the client changes the locks on the door and says, "Go away, I never want to talk to you." But that frequency of contact, that frequency, and in building the relationship and listening to find out what the real client's real needs are and repositioning, and finally you make your sale. So somebody who could have been observing that as an apprentice type salesperson say, failure, 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 failure. No, it wasn't failure. Mm-hmm. This is active learning until eventually you get the desired results. Yeah. So I know that any organization that creates an environment of active experimentation while learning from it and sharing these best processes and techniques and ideas and lessons learned, these are the organizations that will do exceedingly well in these most turbulent of times that we're going to be heading into. They will flourish.
Yep. And that for me, it's just funny, and it's very, again, I don't mind sometimes just saying, hey, I'm pretty good at something like this. And so for me, people have come to me in the last 2 years as I've built what I've built, and I've done it in the length of time I've done it. And again, I'm not anywhere near being a global thing or anything like that, but I'm far enough along in this process for people to notice what I'm doing and come in and say, how have you done it so quickly? And for me, it's just that belief that there is no such thing as a failure. The day I fail will be the day I go downstairs to my wife and say I quit. That will be the day that I fail. And as far as I'm concerned, that day is never coming. So for where we are at this point in life, as individuals, the more we can find and do the work to notice, even if it feels like a failure in the moment, how can you do the work to find that one thing that you can take from it that gives you just enough of an insight to realize that this wasn't in fact a failure, that it was in fact a lesson, and there is in fact an opportunity for you to grow and build and just keep moving, even if you feel like all momentum's lost, just to reestablish something. And the fact is, Denis, man, you're going to have to come back on, because we're going to put a pin in this conversation right here, and we're going to do this again maybe 6, 9, 12 months from now, and just continue the conversation. Because as I said earlier at the beginning, there's something about the work that you do that will always be relevant. And I think there's always going to be something going on whenever we talk within the current climate that meets something that you offer and your expertise, and gives us a great reason for you to be on. But before I let you go, I have to ask you this. I ask this question just about with everybody these days. The word in this show, competitor, it's right there in the title. And then when you look in the mirror and you think Denis Cauvier, the competitor, how would you describe that part of your personality?
I'm a caring, compassionate competitor. I am competitive. I am a goal setter. But I compete more against myself than anybody else, to be honest. And I believe you're using the word collaborative competitor, and I like that. I like that notion, and that really resonates with me. But I would say for me, I'm a compassionate competitor. That it's about, how do I, when I'm competing with others and myself, how do I not only bring out the best in me, but I also bring out the best of them? Because again, you and I and so many more are all part of this human potential movement, whether you're a trainer, a coach, whatever. It's all about the human potential, right? And I get jazzed up that if I'm pouring into somebody else, assuming they're awake and taking the process seriously, they will get better. They will develop an edge. But in the process of me trying to super serve them, I'm invariably being introspective, finding out, okay, what are my blind spots? Where do I need to work? Or I know this is a bright person. They're going to ask me a question about this. This is something I have not researched in a while. I need to go back and whatever, right? If your natural disposition is to be of massive service in whatever you do in life, if you are provide massive service to enough people, the universe will serve you very well. And I think if you want to call that being a competitor, that works for me. I like that. That fits.
I'm with you. On that. We speak from a very similar book when it comes to that of what we do in the worlds that we work in, and what I've loved over the years of this podcast is the tens and now hundreds of people that have come on the show that share similar sentiments to yourself when it means being competitive, is that version of yourself and how you show up and serve others. But as I said, I could keep talking to you for a long time, and I probably will once we're done recording, and I'm sure we'll talk again very soon. But Denis, more than anything, man, I just appreciate the time, the insights. I know this is content that needs to be heard. I'm excited to hear how it's received. And in the meantime, just continued success and best of luck, and enjoy what sounds like somewhat of a regenerative time before the hockey stick take up in the fall starts to come back around. So all the best with that, brother, and great visiting with you.
Thanks, Steve. Always great connecting, and I appreciate this opportunity. Take care, brother.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Career Competitor. And before you leave, be sure to take advantage of your free one-time discovery call with me to see how I can be of service to you as a coach, or potentially even your team. Depending on what it is you're looking for at this point within your career, I want to be able to serve you with 30 minutes of my time to see how I can be of use to you and help you on your path of continued growth towards your optimal self in order to find optimal performance. Be sure to reach out to me, steve@careercompetitor.com, or just head to the website, careercompetitor.com. I look forward to connecting with you soon, and bye for now.